Way back in 1986, I held part of a movie for Ransom. And I've told several people about this since then, and several of them have said, I'm lucky to be alive, because the company I was dealing with was a front for a drug cartel from Colombia. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. Disclaimer, that might just be a vicious rumor. But I'm going to tell you the story, and you tell me what you think. So it was way back in 1986, I believe, right before my first son was born, right before I got pregnant. And I had been under contract with Caribbean Films for several years, 3 years. I would do 2 movies with them, and then I would, go out on the road and dance and promote the movies and that kind of thing, or take time off. It really didn't matter. They didn't care, as long as I didn't work for anybody else. I was exclusive with Caribbean Films. So that kind of started the trend. I don't know if you've ever followed the business or know much about the business, but it got to the point where there were Vivid girls, and there were 5 or 6 Vivid girls, and these ladies would only work with Vivid Video. So if you wanted to see one of their movies, it had to be on Vivid Video label. Well, this was way before video came into play when I was with Caribbean Films. Everything we did was shot on film. So when I started working for this company, which is where I went after Caribbean decided they weren't going to make movies anymore, the owner of Caribbean Films owned over 300 movie theaters across the country. And he decided, instead of paying other production companies to put their movies in his theaters, he would just make his own movies, and he did a really good job of it. I'll make a video later about the Ribald Tales of Canterbury, which was, at the time, the biggest budgeted adult film ever made. We used costumes from Universal Studios. It was a period piece we shot for 9 days, 35 millimeter Panavision, the whole 9 yards. Caribbean decided they weren't going to make movies anymore. They were going to sell all their theaters, and they became what is now known today as the Deja Vu chain. So it's a bunch of gentlemen's clubs, is what he owns now. So after I left Caribbean, I went to work with Essex. Now, Essex did sell a lot of their things on video cassette, because video was just coming into being at around this time. But most of the stuff was still shot on film. So when we were on the set, we had film canisters. They'd load the film into the camera, we'd shoot, and then when the film ran out, it had to be reloaded. And the film that had already been shot was stored away somewhere else so it could be taken to be developed. Well, I was under contract with Essex Films for 1 year, and I was supposed to make, I think it was 2 films, maybe 3, but I only made 2 with Essex that year. And they paid me every week to not work for someone else. Now, during that time, I could go out and dance on the road, or I could stay home, I could do whatever I wanted to. But the gist of it was they didn't want me competing against their company by working for another company. Okay, no problem. Now, the problem came when it was time to do my second movie, and I had not been paid for a couple months. So I hoped that on the completion of this film, I would get what was due to me, and that's not what happened. So let's backtrack a little bit here. One of the movies I made with Caribbean Films, there had been an incident on the set. And the way Caribbean Films liked to operate was they would hire their crew and their cinematographer. The cinematographer is the head of the crew, basically. And they would hire them for a set rate. So he's going to pay them X amount of dollars to film this particular piece, So if he's the gaffer's going to get X amount of dollars to shoot these 2 movies, because he always shot 2 back to back, and so on and so forth. So everybody would get whatever the deal had been cut to shoot these 2 movies. That included overtime, because the owner of Caribbean Films, Harry Money, didn't like to be nickeled and dimed and have to worry about it. So he'd say, look, here's what the standard rate would be if we shot on time. So I'm going to give you a little extra just in case we go over. And this is what you're going to get. And if we go under, that's what you got. You should be happy. If we go over, well, you worked a little harder for it. But there's your incentive to try to get it done faster. Well, everybody agreed. Everybody signed the contract. But when it came down to the wire, these 2 particular movies were taking a little bit longer to shoot than they had anticipated. So we ran way over time. And everybody was angry. And everybody was asking for more money. So they had said they weren't going to work until they got more money. Well, Harry, of course, threw a fit because he had already signed the contract with these people. They knew what they were getting into it when they walked into the production. So long story short, the cinematographer confiscated a couple of the shot canisters. You've probably seen them, those round canisters that the film sits in. These had been shot but not developed. And without them, we could not complete the movie. So he took them and he hid them. And he said, you're not getting them back until you pay my crew what they're asking. Because he was the head of the crew. It was up to him to stand up for his people. Because when he works in another production or something and he wants to know he can count on a good best boy or a good gaffer or he's got good people working with him, he knows who to ask for. These are his people that he's comfortable with, and he's vetted, and he knows that they know what they're doing. So he hid these canisters away. And of course, Harry had no choice but to say, okay, here's your extra money. But I will never work with any of you people again. And obviously, that was another big incentive in his decision to not make movies anymore. Well, I'm just sitting by the sidelines watching all this go down, right? And I'm not involved. I had nothing to do with making the deals with these people, but I remembered that. So when I got to the set with Essex, and they hadn't paid me for a couple months, and I knew that this was the end of my contract and I would only be making 2 movies, and there was only a few more weeks left in the contract. If I wanted what was owed to me, I was going to have to pull a stunt like that. And I did. My husband and I, we confiscated a couple canisters and we took them back to the hotel room with us. And we called Essex and told them, you know, you owe us a lot of money for the last few months that you haven't paid us, and for the making of this film. I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars. So you owe us a pretty good chunk of change. And they kind of made it clear that they had no intention of paying us. And that's when my husband said, well, that's too bad because we have a couple of the canisters of the film we just shot. Oh my gosh. Oh, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall. I'm sure they were not pleased. Bottom line, we met in a parking lot because we wanted it to be a public place. You know, we didn't want any shenanigans. We'd heard stories. We had not heard these stories, but we had heard stories about adult film companies. Oh, my cat's toy. I don't know if you heard that or not. She's intrigued. Anywho, so we met and we gave him the canisters. He gave us the money. Done deal. Everything's okay. We walk away. Later on, I retell what happened to a couple of my friends. I think Barbara Dare was one of them. I might be wrong. Don't go quoting me on that. But she and I were hanging around a little bit at that time. I will do a video on that some other time. And I wondered, you know, what's going down. And they told me, you are really lucky that you got to live. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, I heard. Rumor has it, you know, this company is owned by a drug cartel from Colombia. Now, again, I don't know if that's really true. Before I made this video, I looked it up online. They did go under in 1988, which I wonder if they're a front for a drug cartel, how did they run out of money, right? But they went under because they got arrested for shipping obscene materials across state lines. They shipped something to Tennessee, and who knew Tennessee would be conservative and not want something like that? You probably already heard in the news that Pornhub has been banned in Florida. So anyway, this stuff has been going on for decades, obviously, centuries, really. Anyway, I was amazed to hear what this person had said. So I asked a few other people. I said, hey, I got to tell you something. This thing happened, and I know Essex is no longer in business anymore, so it's kind of a moot point as far as anybody working with them. I'm not protecting anybody from getting ripped off. But I wanted to know, because somebody had said this, is this true? And this person that I mentioned it to, yeah, that's, wow, you got guts, lady. You're lucky to be alive. I didn't know. So I thought, okay, third time's a charm. And I mentioned it to somebody else, and yeah, that's what they said too. Again, it could just be a nasty rumor going through the business. Put your comments down below. Tell me what you think. But I'm certainly not the first to pull that trick. That's how I learned it, from somebody else doing it, you know. And now that things are shot on an SD card, that's very difficult to do anymore. I don't think that will ever happen again, at least not in that genre of business. You know, now maybe if you're shooting a big movie, but if you're shooting a big movie for a big company, a big studio production, there's going to be people there watching those canisters, you know, like a hawk. They're bodyguards for those canisters, because those are worth millions of dollars, you know, if you're spending money on a big budget production. So I don't think that will really happen again. At least I don't foresee it happening in the near future. Certainly not in that particular business. But that was pretty bizarre that I would hear that after the fact. And you know, that did kind of cross my mind a little bit, obviously, because that's why I said I wanted to meet in a public area. You know, don't come to my hotel room, don't meet me at your office or something like that. Let's meet in a public place, because that was kind of on the back of my mind. But I never, ever would have thought that they were a front for some kind of drug cartel. That just, I never would have thought that. And, you know, maybe I was naive, you know, looking back on it, to have not thought that. But they seemed very legitimate, and I didn't see any reason for somebody to, in that business, no, it didn't unfathomable to me. Anyway, tell me what you think. Do you think they really were? Or was this just a strange rumor? Thank you very much for watching.